This date is February 13th, 2015. A sting-off. Just, I don't know what time it is. It's probably around midnight. A sting-off just walked in front of my apartment on a catwalk out here on the second floor. He walked back. He walked in front of my apartment, and then he ran back, but not just running. He was like stomping, running. There, he just did it again. I don't know if this video caught it or not. It's a dude wearing a baseball cap. It looked white or gray. Can't be certain. And he had like a gray and red jacket. Yeah, gray and red jacket. There he is, right there. Put up with this fucking shit, motherfucker. I hope this video caught it. Kind of hard to tell. I can't really see very well. It is dark after all. My apartment lights are out. And this is a very crappy. This is an El Cheapo prepaid cell phone that I paid like $30 for at Best Buy. It has limited video and audio capabilities, and it's not the best. It's not like I could afford. It's not like I can afford anything better or anything. That son of a bitch came from apartments way over there, and there's stairs over there for those people to take over there. For them to walk in front of my apartment and to go all the way over there to these stairs, they're like going way out of their fucking way. I mean, majorly out of their way. In order to go down the stairs. So it's deliberate and intentional. They're sting operatives, and they're deliberately going back and forth in front of my apartment. And they deliberately stomp because it's a form of harassment. I'm already familiar with the tactics. Hell, I've been targeted by sting ops all my fucking life. The Dunham family in the Selwood neighborhood here in Portland, Oregon, were neighbors of ours, and they're sting ops for the county sheriffs. And they target people for the purpose of framing and for murder. And me and my family became targeted by the county sheriffs and by the Dunhams in 1971 when I was only 6 years old. I witnessed the county sheriffs and Dunham family framing a neighbor that lived a block away from me and the Dunhams. The Dunhams lived only 2 houses away from me, so they were like immediate neighbors. They're not next door neighbors, but they're like 1 house away from being a next door neighbor. So they were very close neighbors that lived very close to us. And I didn't know the Dunhams at the time. The day that the county sheriff and the Dunham's family was framing a neighbor that lived a block away from us, that was in 1971. That particular day was my first meeting. my introduction day, if you will, to the Dunham family. And I was being babysitted by Darlene Dunham. And the Dunhams used me and used their own children in a sting op to frame a neighbor that lived a block away. Now, I was only 6 years old at the time, so I was too damn young to understand what the fuck was going on. I'm in the care of this adult, and I'm only 6 years old, so I didn't know what the hell was going on. And Darlene Dunham took me to this house that was a block away from where I lived. And she took her children to this house. And there was a county sheriff officer in uniform inside this house. And the county sheriff officer was sitting in a chair by a window. And when we got near the house, Darlene Dunham told me and her children to cross the street and to go play in that particular yard. And she's pointing out the yard. And she, so Darlene Dunham's children headed over there, and I'm only 6 years old, so I'm under, I'm being babysitted by this adult lady, so I'm doing what she told me to do. I didn't understand the reason or the purpose why she was telling us to do this. Her children didn't seem to have any problem with doing any of this. But I didn't understand the reason behind it or the purpose for it. I was confused, but I did what she told me to do. So I crossed the street, and me and the Dunham children were in that yard. And as soon as we got into that yard, the county sheriff officer that was inside the house on this property opened their window, and the county sheriff officer started tossing out candy bars at me and at the Dunham children. And the Dunham children were immediately laughing and grinning and shit, and were picking up these candy bars. And I was confused as hell. I didn't understand what the fuck was going on. I knew they're not my candy bars. Keep in mind, I'm only 6 years old. I'm only 6 years old at the time, and I know they're not my candy bars. And I didn't know what's going on or what I was supposed to do. I didn't know who this person was that was tossing the candy bars. So I turned to look over at Darlene Dunham, who was standing across the street and I noticed at this moment that she had a big metal green camera. And she was holding that camera up to her face because she was snapping photogenic photos of me and her children of me and her children while her children were picking up candy bars. And I yelled over at Darlene Dunham saying, "Am I supposed to pick these up?" I literally asked her that from across the street. I yelled at her saying, "Am I supposed to pick these up?" And she lowered the camera, and she was grinning from ear to ear. And she said to me, pick up the candy bars." And then she put the camera that she was using back up to her face again. So I'm doing what I'm told by the person that I was under the care of, not really understanding what the fuck's going on. And I was aware of the fact that Darlene Dunham was snapping photogenic photos of us at this point. And I didn't understand what the hell was going on. And I ended up getting too close to that window and noticed that the person that was tossing the candy bars was a county sheriff officer in uniform. He was trying to keep his body just to the side of the window so that the only thing that was actually visible through the window was that county sheriff officer's arm. That was the only fucking thing that as far as Darlene Dunham's point of view goes anyway, the only thing visible about the county sheriff officer was his arm. That was the only thing he had visible in front of that window. So he was trying to sit. He was sitting to the side of the window and just tossing out the candy bars, and Darlene Dunham was snapping photogenic photos of the county sheriff officer with his short-sleeved arm hanging out the damn window, holding candy bars and then tossing the candy bars. So when the county sheriff officer reached the point where he ran out of candy bars. He just said out loud that he's done, and he reached over and closed the window. And the moment he closed the window, that's when Darlene Dunham yelled over at me and over at her children, and she said, "Okay, come back over here." So I did what I was told. This is the lady I'm under the care of. I was placed under her charge by my own mother. So, I have to trust her and do what she says. I'm only 6 years old. Now, from this point forward, Darlene Dunham and her children were walking me home to take me home, and it's only a block walk. And during this walk, I continuously asked questions because I didn't know what the hell was going on. Darlene Dunham and her children at this point during this walk were celebrating. And they were openly referring to the person that lived in that house as a pedophile. But they were laughing and they were celebrating while they were doing this. And they were smirking. And keep in mind, I'm only 6 years old. This is 1971. There was no internet in those days. As a matter of fact, I didn't even have a TV. I think it was later that year, or it was the very next year that we had a TV. Because we didn't have a working TV when I was 6 years old. So I didn't even have access to TV or commercials or anything back then. And so I had very limited television knowledge. I'm only 6 years old at the time. I'm not in school yet. I just turned 6 years old. So I'm at a very young age. I didn't know what the hell the word pedophile even meant. They could have said astronaut, and I wouldn't have understood what that meant either. Okay, so that should give you an example of what my mindset was towards what happened. In other words, I had no clue they were making criminal accusations, and I had no clue they were framing the person that lived there. I had no fucking clue whatsoever. All I know was what they did. But I was too young and lacking the wisdom to understand what was going on and what I was witnessing. In other words, I didn't realize I was witnessing the county sheriffs and the Dunham's family framing a neighbor as a pedophile. I didn't realize that's what happened. I just assumed, since I'm only 6 years old, I just assumed that the dude in the uniform is just a nice guy. I viewed the whole situation as a nice lady took me for a walk and then took me to meet a nice man. The nice man gave us all candy bars. And then the nice lady took me home again. That's how I viewed the situation at my 6 years of age. And I didn't even know what the word pedophile even meant. So the Dunham's family, as they were taking me home, they were celebrating what they just did. And they were talking about Darlene Dunham, the mother of the Dunham family, was talking to her children about how they're going to go out for a pizza after they drop me off at home. And they're going to celebrate. And it was Darlene Dunham's children that started calling the person that lived there a pedophile. Now, I didn't realize they're making a criminal accusation because I didn't know what the fucking word even meant. I never even heard that word before in my life, so I had no clue what that word meant. I even asked them, what's a pedophile? And they all just grinned at me. Every one of them, Darlene Dunham and her children, they just grinned at me, and they didn't answer my question. They ignored my question. And they were talking about, they just ignored my question, and they started talking about pizza again. And I noticed that Darlene Dunham was pulling out the photogenic photos from this camera she was carrying. It was very big, all metal, all county sheriff green metal camera with a big flash bulb thing on the top of it. If you ever see whodunit movie or something where you see detectives from the 50s or 60s with those big-ass cameras with the flash bulb things that stick up, and they take photogenic photos with flash bulb things. When you see those big cameras like that, that's kind of like what this camera was, but it was a more modern version of those old movies where you see those type of cameras like from the 50s or 60s. But it was almost the same size, and it was all metal, but it was more sleek, but still in the same line as those old cameras like that. And I was curious about the camera. I noticed that Darlene Dunham was stuffing these photogenic photos that she took, and she was stuffing them into an envelope. Now, I'm fully aware that she just took photogenic photos of me and her children picking up those damn candy bars. So I asked her, I'm only 6 years old, so I just asked her, oh, could I have one of those? Because I thought it would be, cool to have one of those. And Darlene Dunham just grinned at me and told me, oh no, you can't have these photos. These are special photos, is what she told me. And this is when I noticed the camera, and I noticed there was a big round yellow seal on this camera. It was round, it was yellow, it was some sort of, insignia. I didn't know what the hell it was, but I never forgot what it looked like. I didn't know at the time what it was. I didn't know the person that was in the house at the time was a county sheriff officer. I didn't even know what the fuck a county sheriff officer was, okay? I was only 6 years old. All I know is I saw the dude in his uniform. It took years later for me to find out and figure out that dude that was throwing the candy bars was a county sheriff officer. Because at the time this happened, I was only 6 years old, and I didn't know what the hell a police officer was. I didn't know what the fuck a county sheriff officer was. I had no fucking clue of any of this kind of shit. I was only 6 years old. But I seen the dude in his uniform, and I never forgot what it looked like. And I seen the camera Darlene Dunham was holding, and I never forgot what that camera looked like. And I seen the seal that was on the camera, and I never forgot what that looked like. I didn't understand what any of it meant. It took a couple of years. When I got old enough to where I got interested in news and watching actual news programs like on TV, that's when I discovered, oh, that was a county sheriff officer that was doing that, because I saw a county sheriff officer on TV, and I'm like, oh my God, that's who was tossing those candy bars at me. It was a fucking county sheriff officer, because I didn't know. I just didn't know. I had no idea who they wouldn't tell me who he was or what was going on. I asked if I could have one of those photogenic photos, and Darlene Dunham told me, no, these are special photos, and she told me I can't have any of these. And I was curious about the camera because it was a weird camera. I never seen a camera like that before. My mother and my father owned a couple of cameras, and there were normal cameras that normal people would have back in the day, back in 1971. And the normal cameras that my parents had were much smaller than the camera that Darlene Dunham had in her hands. This was a big, as far as I was concerned, it was a big monstrosity of a fucking camera, and it was all metal, and it was big, it was huge, and it had this very noticeable yellow round seal on it that drew my attention to it. And I asked her, oh, could I hold the camera for her? Because I was curious. I wanted to see how much the camera weighed. Keep in mind, I didn't realize these people just committed a crime. I didn't realize these people were framing people. I had no fucking clue. And they're in celebration mode. They're not in we're criminals, act like nothing happened mode. They're all in celebration mode, and they were all talking about this shit. And I was just too damn young to understand what the fuck was going on. I asked if I could hold the camera. She told me no, that she borrowed this camera and she has to return it. And she said it's not her camera to let me hold it. She said she can't let me hold it because it's not her camera. So she admitted to me this is not her camera. Now, of course, at the time, I didn't know who the fuck's camera it was. Now, when Darlene Dunham and her children dropped me off at home, I went inside my house, and I had probably, I don't know, several candy bars. It took both my hands literally to carry these candy bars. I don't remember how many exactly I had. I think I had like 3 or 4. I think I had at least 3 candy bars, maybe 4 or 5. I'm not entirely sure. I can't remember. I wasn't really counting the candy bars. It was enough to. I stuffed all my pockets with the candy bars, and when I was walking up my steps to go into my house, I was pulling out the candy bars out of my pockets and was holding them in my hands, and as I walked through the door. And my mother noticed that I'm munching on this candy bar, and she noticed I had like 3 or 4 other candy bars in my hand, and she said, my mother was in shock at this, and she said, where did you get all those candy bars at? And she, she didn't understand. She knew Darlene Dunham took me for a walk with her children. Darlene Dunham asked my mother if she could take me for that walk with her children, and my mother agreed. I think Darlene Dunham said that she was going to take us to the park or something like that, I think. Well, she never took us to the park. She just took us a block away to a house where a county sheriff officer was waiting for us to arrive. Well, my mother asked me, where did I get all those candy bars from? And I said, now keep in mind, I'm only 6 years old, and as far as I was concerned, this nice lady took me to meet a nice man. Nice man gave me candy bars, and then nice lady took me home. And these people that took me on this walk were referring to that person as a pedophile after the fact, and they didn't want to tell me what that word meant. So when my mother asked me, where did I get these candy bars from? I said, I was already aware that my mom knew that Darlene Dunham took me for a walk. I was already aware of that. So I just said, they took me to meet a nice pedophile. He gave them to us. Now, keep in mind, I didn't know. That's what I told my mother. And that's what the Dunham family referred to him as. And now, keep in mind, I had no clue what that fucking word meant. None. I had no clue whatsoever what that word even meant. I was only 6 years old. I just turned 6. I had no clue. All I know is nice lady took me for a walk with her children. Nice lady took me meet nice man that gave us all a bunch of candy bars. Nice lady took photogenic photos of it all, and then nice lady took us all home again, or took me home again. That's how I saw the situation as a 6-year-old. So I didn't view the situation as a crime or a criminal act taking place. I had no fucking clue, and I didn't realize that I had no clue what that word even meant. But I know damn well that's what they were calling him, or the person that lived there anyway. They were saying the person that lives there is a pedophile right after they got done with all this shit. So this is why I answered my mother's question in that way. And, of course, you can imagine the shock on my mother's face. My mother's jaw dropped at that. She's like, and her jaw just dropped. I never seen her jaw drop so damn much. And she just said, stay right here. And then my mother bolted out the door to go after the Dunhams to find out what the fuck's going on. Now, keep in mind, I'm only 6 years old, and I didn't understand back then what the fuck's going on. But I have enough wisdom a few years later to realize what the fuck happened. There was a county sheriff's vehicle parked in front of that house, now where that county sheriff officer was waiting for us to arrive. And I noticed that green vehicle that was parked in front of the house. But I didn't know what the fuck it was. I didn't know what it meant. But I noticed it was an odd vehicle because it had those light things on it, and I didn't know what that meant. That's what drew my attention to it. But I had no clue what it meant. But, of course, I never forgot that either. So, years later, I realized, well, gee, this was a county sheriff officer. And Darlene Dunham's admitting to me that that's not her camera. and she admitted she borrowed it. Well, years later, I realized, well, gee, this is a county sheriff office camera. It has a county sheriff's seal on it. My mother went after the Dunhams to find out what the fuck's going on. I'm going to have to assume that the county sheriff officer that was in that house got in his vehicle and drove over to Darlene Dunham's house and was waiting for Darlene Dunham and her children to arrive at her house to pick up the camera and to pick up the photogenic photos. And it's during this point when my mother is confronting them. Now, I don't know what happened because my mother never told me what happened, but when my mother came back from this confrontation she was going to have with the Dunhams, she didn't say a word to me about what happened. I'm going to assume that the Dunhams and the county sheriff officer may have, on the fly, told my mother some kind of a bullshit story. And I'm going to have to assume that my mother, at some point within the next 10 days, made some sort of a mention to this incident, possibly to my father. And the reason I'm saying this is because 10 days after this incident, county sheriff detective that's not in uniform, he's in plain clothes, basically dressed like a detective, was at our door, and this detective was bullying my mother into giving him permission to enter our home so that he can inspect our basement. He had no warrant, no nothing, no probable cause. He failed to state a cause of any sort whatsoever. And my mother, not understanding the law very well and not understanding what's going on very well, was scared of this detective, so she knuckled under his coercion and let this detective come into the house and enter the basement. So this detective and my mother entered the basement. I was going to follow them, but my mother told me to stay upstairs, so I didn't. And they were down there in the basement for about, I would say, 3 minutes, if that. It might not even been that long. It might have been about 2 minutes. They weren't down there very long. Enough to exchange a few words, essentially. And then the detective came back up the stairs, and my mother escorted him to the door, and he left. And as soon as this detective left and got down the bottom of our stairs and basically was off our porch and off our property, my mother, in a nervous panic, warned me to never answer the door. So, now, keep in mind, I'm only 6 years old. I'm only 6 years old at the time. I had next to no wisdom as to when it comes to understanding what the fuck was happening. But I have a damn good memory. I didn't understand what the fuck's going on back then. You know, as I got older and acquired more wisdom, I realized that this detective must have made some sort of a threat or hinted at a threat to my mother while they were in the basement. And this was an attempt at intimidation by the county sheriffs to silence my mother. My mother was genuinely scared of this detective. And she knew I'm only 6 years old. She knows I'm just too damn young to understand what the fuck's going on. And, you know, she didn't want to confide in me as to what's going on. She's trying to protect me. I'm just a 6-year-old kid at the time, okay? She's not going to explain adult issues with me when I'm only 6 years old. But looking back on it, I can, based on my recollection and memory of the events, of which I remember very well. I had very little understanding back then, but I think it was the fact that I didn't understand what the fuck was going on, and all this weird shit was just happening all of a sudden. I think that's one of the main reasons why it hung in my memory so well, because I was just so confused. So much weird shit was going on, and I didn't understand any of it, and it was driving me nuts. I was a very inquisitive kid back then. I was never afraid to ask questions, you know, because I was curious, you know. I was a curious 6-year-old. I was always asking questions about things I didn't understand, you know, wanting people to explain things to me and stuff, you know. And the treatment I got from the Dunham family and from this county sheriff officer that was tossing those candy bars at me, and 10 days later, this county sheriff officer coercing my mother into letting him into the home just so he could make a fucking threat away from my presence to my mother. You know, it was all weird for me, and I knew bad things were going on, and I didn't understand what it was or why it was happening. You know, I was intelligent and observant enough to know that bad things were happening, and I just didn't understand it. And that, combined with my lack of understanding of what was happening, I think caused me to take a great deal of thought involved in it, which is one of the reasons why I remember it so clearly. Now, another reason that I remember it very clearly is because this was my introduction to the Dunham family. This was my earliest memory of the Dunham family. Darlene Dunham didn't just take me for this walk. She took her youngest son, Kurt Dunham, who was 5 at the time, and she took her daughter, Tammy Dunham, who was, I think she was a year older than me, possibly 2 years older than me. I'm not quite sure about her age. I never really asked her age, but I knew she was at least a year older than me, at least. I would say she's 1 to 2 years older than me, so she was like 7 or 8 at the time. I always thought of her as a bigger kid. Okay, put it that way. She was bigger than me, so I knew she was a bigger kid. And I think I seem to recall sometime in the future learning that she was like a year, like she was like 2 years older than Kurt Dunham, or 3 years older than Kurt Dunham. So I know she had like 1.5 years older. She was like 1.5 years older than I was at the time. So she was like the big kid in the group. The day the Dunhams took me to that house, that was my introduction to the Dunham family. The Darlene Dunham was basically introducing herself to me, and I was introducing myself to them. And her children were introducing themselves to me, and of course I introduced myself to them. Kurt Dunham asked me how old I was, and I told him I was 6, and I asked him how old he was. He said he was 5. So that's one of the reasons why I can remember this day so clearly, and that's one of the reasons why I can still remember this all took place back in 1971, because, gee, when I was 6 years old, I'm not keeping track of what fucking year it is. I didn't even know what the hell a calendar was back when I was only 6 years old, you know. So that's one of the main reasons why I can even remember this took place in 71, because I remember we were introducing ourselves on the walk to this house, and you know, they asked me how old I was. I asked them how old they were, and I never forgot these conversations that we had. I never forgot the conversations that we had on the walk to the house, and I never forgot the conversations we had on the walk where they're taking me back home. And it was such a weird day because I didn't realize it was a bad day that day. It was just weird. I didn't think of it as a bad day. I thought of it as just a weird day. I thought, you know, because like I said, I deemed the situation as A nice lady takes me for a walk. A nice lady takes me to meet nice man that gives us all candy bars. A nice lady takes photos of it. Then nice lady takes me home again. That's how I viewed the situation. Because I'm only 6 years old. But a whole lot of weird things. So I didn't think of it as a bad thing. I thought it was a good thing at the time. I thought it was a good day. But at the same time, a lot of weird things was going on that I didn't understand, and I was asking questions the whole fucking time, and nobody wanted to explain to me what the fuck was going on. And almost every question I asked was not being answered. The only question I asked that Darlene Dunham answered was, am I supposed to pick up these candy bars? That was the only question I asked her that she answered. All the rest of the questions, really, they're either avoided or they're just like, to tell. Oh, she answered the question about the photogenic photos. I asked her if I could have one, and she said no. But when it came to asking about, they were openly referring to this person that lived in this house as the Dunham family was taking me back home. When they got done framing this person that lived there, and they started taking me back home, the Dunhams were in celebration mode, and they were talking about going out for Pizza Hut. Now, to give you an understanding of how young I was and what my understandings of things was, and to emphasize the fact that I didn't have a TV yet, my family didn't own a TV yet. I had no clue what the fuck a pizza was. I didn't even know what Pizza Hut was. So I was asking them questions like, "What's a pizza?" Because I didn't know. I honestly didn't know. I was only 6 years old and I never had a pizza. Or if I did, I have no recollection of it. I just know I never had a pizza. Because my family didn't care for pizza. My family, when my family went out to a fast food place or a restaurant or something, they would either go to a burger joint, like for instance, oh gosh, what is the name of that place? A&W Root Beer Restaurant. A&W's restaurants that used to be in business near our neighborhood back at the time. There was an A&W restaurant. So we usually went out for burgers. That was the main place we went. Back when I was a small child. Sometimes we went to a Burgerville for burgers, and if my parents took us to a restaurant, they would usually get they would go to a restaurant that would usually have some kind of a chicken fried steak kind of a meal, because that seemed to be their thing as far as their favorite type of meal to get at a restaurant. And of course, me and my older brother, we would just get burgers. So anytime we went out someplace, we would always just have burgers. At least me and my brother, anyway. So we never went to a pizza place. And I think back in 1971, I don't think pizzas were all that popular yet either. I don't even think they had a lot of pizza commercials yet back in 71. Not that it would have mattered because we didn't own a TV yet. I think it was later in that year that we were actually able to get a TV. My parents just bought the house that we were living at like in 1965. And they were, struggling to get by. They weren't poor, but they weren't rich either. They were just making ends meet, and I just don't think at the time they deemed a TV as a necessity. I think we did have a TV at a certain point when I was much younger, and I just don't remember it. And I think it broke or something, and they just didn't have the money yet to buy another TV. And I during my earliest years, that I can recall, like when I'm 5, 6 years old, which is like the earliest years that I can recall events, we just didn't have a TV. So I literally had, I had no understanding of a lot of the terms that the Dunhams were talking about. I didn't know what the hell a pizza was. I didn't know what the fuck a pedophile was. I didn't understand what was going on, and nobody wanted to explain to me what was going on. And in essence, it took years for me to come to grips with what happened. And the reason why is because after my mother was threatened by and intimidated by this county sheriff detective that insisted on entering our home. From this point forward, the Dunham family was heavily befriending my family. And they did this for the purpose of getting further access to me. I was too damn young at the time to understand what the hell's going on. Keep in mind, I didn't realize they just framed that neighbor that lived a block away as a pedophile. I had no clue, and neither did my mother, because my mother didn't question me about what happened that day. I have to assume that whatever the Dunhams and the county sheriff told my mother was either satisfied with that or felt that for whatever reason she just didn't feel the need to discuss it with me. And she never questioned me on it. So she didn't know what they did either. If she would have questioned me thoroughly, both my mother and father would have probably found out that these people are dangerous. They just framed a neighbor as a goddamn pedophile. This county sheriff officer was acting as a double inside a neighbor's house, and the Dunham's family brought a bunch of children there, and so that the county sheriff officer could act as a double and toss out candy bars to the children while Darlene Dunham is across the street using a county sheriff camera to take photogenic photos of it. Doubles and photogenic photos. That's what they were using. That's how they framed that neighbor. And I was used in that fucking operation. And I was too damn young to understand what the hell was going on. Well, me and my family became targeted as a consequence of me being a witness to it and making mention of it to my mother. Because after this county sheriff officer coerced and threatened my mother, of which she never talked to me about because she was afraid to, from this point forward, Darlene Dunham and her side of the family was heavily befriending my mother and my father, and they were doing this for the purpose of gaining further access to me. They literally within a week after Darlene Dunham started majorly palling up to my mother, literally a week went by of this behavior going on. And then Darlene Dunham asked my mother, "Oh, can she take me along with her children to the movies?" And my mother, not really understanding how bad these people really are, she agreed, because at this point she thinks Darlene Dunham's her friend, and my mother wanted to be friends with her. So Darlene Dunham, the Dunham started taking me to the movie theaters with her children, and it was Darlene Dunham's husband, Cal Dunham, that would drive us to the movie theaters and would drop us off. And the children that Darlene Dunham would bring was me and Kurt Dunham. She didn't bring any of her other children. She has 4 children, and she didn't bring her other children. And when she took us into the movie theater, she insisted on having, and this was a repeated process. I emphasize, this was a repeated process. She had to have the same seats over and over and over and over again. And she insisted that there be an empty seat in between me and her. And she said, "Oh, this empty seat's for us to put our coats on." That was her excuse. And she had her son, Kurt Dunham, on the opposite side of her. So in other words, I'm not allowed to be friends with her son. I'm not allowed to even talk with her son. As a matter of fact, she wants me to sit separately from them, one seat separate from them. And right at the beginning of the movie, when the movie isn't even started yet, and it's just the commercials rolling, how they show the previews and commercials and shit. and they'll show you ads about wanting to go out into the lobby to get popcorn and pop and whatever. During these scenes, some dude, Darlene Dunham insisted we sit way in the back, and I had to sit on the very end seat, and I had to sit there alone. She made me sit there alone, where there's one seat separating me from them. And Kirk Dunham's on the far side of her, so I'm not even allowed to talk to him or visit with him. She doesn't even want Kirk Dunham to be visible to anybody. And during this time when the credits are playing, or not credits, but the movie previews and whatnot, where they're showing upcoming previews of other movies or whatever, some dude would walk into the theater. And keep in mind, I'm on the end aisle. I'm on the furthest back aisle, so that there's no way anybody can sit behind me. And I'm on the very end, right next to the walkway, where people come into the theater and walk down to where they can select their seats. Well, during the part where the previews are playing, this dude would walk into the theater, get several feet ahead of me, turn around, and then aim a camera right at me and snap a photogenic photo. And then he would walk right back out of the theater. And Darlene Dunham did this repeatedly. This was a repeated, everything I've just said about the movie theater was a repeated process. And they were taking me to the movies on average of once a week, once every other week. There were several movies that they took me to. And each and every time, this process was repeated over and over again. Each and every time we had to have the very back aisle. Each and every time I had to sit on the very end of the furthest back aisle, right next to where the walkway is. And there had to be an empty seat in between me and Darlene Dunham. And each and every time, she would have Kirk Dunham on the opposite side of her. And she insisted that seat in between me and Darlene Dunham, she insisted that seat had to stay empty. And each and every time, as far as this officer who was in plain clothing, it was a repeated process where they would walk into the theater. I got to a point where I was expecting it, because I noticed it right off the bat. I mean, right off the bat. I don't know what the hell they're thinking, but I noticed it immediately. And I was already thinking in terms of, Darlene Dunham was taking photogenic photos of me back when she took me and her children to that house, and this person in a uniform was tossing candy bars at us. Well, now she's taking me to the movies, and during every fucking time during the it's like right before the movie starts, during the preview aspect, and the theater goes dark, that's when this guy would walk into the theater and turn around and snap a photo in my direction, and then would walk right back out of the theater. And this was a repeated process that happened over and over and over again. Now, here's the thing. Darlene Dunham was taking me to see extremely inappropriate movies. I cannot remember the names of the movies, but I'm sure if I actually looked at the movies, at least the very beginnings of the movies, I could probably point out the movies that she was taking me to. Some of the movies, we didn't stay in there for the full movie. We just went in there long enough for her fuck buddies in law enforcement to snap a photogenic photo of me. And then when the movie would get started, then Darlene Dunham would just take us out of the theater and then go take us into another theater. And then they did the same thing in there. So there was a couple of times there where she took us into 2-3 different theaters, and each and every time we had to have the same fucking seats, and each and every time some dude would walk in and snap a photogenic photo in my direction. And I noticed it right off the bat, and I didn't understand. Keep in mind, I'm only 6 years old. I didn't understand what's going on, but I knew, I was under the belief at this point that the Dunhams are just weird. Keep in mind, I have any concept of crime. I didn't understand what crime even was. I had no idea. They were taking me to see very inappropriate movies. They took me to see a fucking movie. It was some sort of a, oh God, what type of movie is that where you see a bunch of teenagers on the beach or something? Some kind of a movie like this. And it started out with some bitch being topless on the damn beach. And she's laying down on a damn towel. And a dog runs up to her. She has her top undone, but she's laying on her stomach, so nothing's visible. And a dog comes along and grabs the strap of her top and runs off with it down the beach. And the woman gets up and runs, topless, and she gets up and runs after the dog. And then they're basically showing slow-mo video of this bitch running after the damn dog with her damn boobs bouncing all over the goddamn place. And Darlene Dunham made us sit through that entire scene until that entire scene completed before she told me and Kurt Dunham to get up because we're leaving. And there was another time. Most of the movies that she was taking us to were very inappropriate, very bad movies, not appropriate for children whatsoever. One of the last bad movies that she took me to see was Basket Case. That's the one I remember the most because that's the one movie that Darlene Dunham made us sit through the entire fucking movie. Darlene Dunham made us sit through that entire goddamn fucking sick-ass movie. So, for this particular movie, there was no leaving after a few bad scenes show up. This particular movie, she made me and Kurt Dunham sit there the entire fucking time. This movie is sick. It has blood and gore, and it had rape and murder, and my God, you fucking name it. This movie was god awful, horrible. And she made me sit through this entire fucking movie. And during this particular movie, the people that were snapping the photogenic photos were doing something different this time. When it got to the scene where the freak of the movie, the monster of the movie, if you will, committed a homicide and he started to rape a person that he murdered, Darlene Dunham told me to cover my eyes during that one scene, and that's the only scene and the only time Darlene Dunham told me to close my eyes. And I closed my eyes. At the moment I covered my eyes with my hands, she told me to cover my eyes. She didn't tell me to close my eyes, she told me to cover my eyes, so I covered my eyes. And I actually closed my eyes too. But then I could hear that there was a dude that was sitting right in front of me. And this theater is virtually empty. Virtually empty. There may have been 4 people in this, there are about 6 people in this theater. And one of the people was sitting right in front of me. And the moment Darlene Dunham told me to cover my eyes, and I covered my eyes, I could hear the dude that's in the seat right in front of me turning around, and he's facing me. And I have my eyes covered. I'm not peeking. I'm not looking or nothing. And but I had my eyes open. My eyes are covered, but my eyes were open. And I could see a flash bulb taking place. So I could hear the flash bulb of a camera going off. And it was the dude that's sitting right in front of me. So I peeked to look to see what the hell's going on. And this dude that was sitting in front of me turned around and was facing me and was snapping photogenic photos of me at close fucking range while I'm covering my eyes with my hands. And this fucking idiot, who I have to assume is either a county sheriff officer or a Portland police officer in plain clothing, this fucking idiot is assuming that I'm peeking at the movie. and he laughs at this. He says to Darlene Dunham, he's peeking. And he's laughing at this. And Darlene Dunham laughed at that. And then he snapped another fucking photogenic photo. I wasn't peeking at the damn worthless piece of shit movie. I was peeking at the son of a bitch was snapping fucking genic photos at me and didn't give a damn if I knew it. Now, I didn't understand what the hell was going on. But I do remember after this, Darlene Dunham, for the first time, they actually took me out for a pizza after this. So they were trying to make my day a nice day after this. And I think because they wanted me to forget about how bad that movie was, and they didn't want me to make mention of it to my parents as to the movie that they took me to. So they tried to give me a nice day after this. They took me out for a fucking pizza after that. So the day ended, or the day out with these people ended in a good way in that sense. And because of it, I didn't think to mention this to my mother, because like I said, I'm only 6. I didn't realize she was taking me to see bad movies. I didn't realize these movies were inappropriate for kids. I had no concept of good movies, bad movies, movies that are appropriate for kids, movies that are inappropriate for kids. I didn't understand what the hell's going on. I'm just 6 years old, and whatever adult that I happen to be with, they're the people that I'm supposed to do what they say. So, I didn't question them. It's like I knew that this lady was my mother's friend. My mother was referring to Darlene Dunham as her friend at this point. So, I figured, well, if my mother and my father trusted Dunhams, well, then, I should trust them. So I didn't think of them as bad people, and I didn't think that they were setting me and my family up. And I didn't want to think of them in those terms. I just thought of them. So I choose to think of them as just weird. Because, like I said, I didn't have any understanding of crime or anything. I didn't realize that from this point forward, this is when Darlene Dunham started inviting my mother to come along. My mother's name is Valerie Quigley. At the time, her name was Valerie Wagar. Darlene Dunham started inviting my mother, Valerie Wagar, at the time, to come along to the theaters. And this time, we started watching Disney movies. They took us to see a Disney movie with Don Knotts and Tim Conway. It was like sort of like a cowboy mining type of a movie, and for the first time, I actually enjoyed myself at a movie theater. And ironically, Darlene Dunham insisted on the same seats, just like she always did. Only this time, my mother got to sit in the empty seat. And this time, right before the movie started, there's no movie played yet. This dude that comes in each and every time to snap photogenic photos of me, he came in and he's standing at the doorway and he was trying to hide it. He was just like waiting at the doorway. Darlene Dunham distracted my mother and telling my mother to look over at somebody over on the other side of the theater. She was saying something about somebody over on the other side of the theater. And so my mother was looking over towards her left, over at somebody at the theater, other side of the theater, because Darlene Dunham was telling her to do this. And during this time, that's when this dude started walking, got several feet ahead of me, and he turned around and he snapped another photogenic photo. I noticed it. My mother did not. Because Darlene Dunham was distracting my mother and asking her to telling my mother to look over to the other side of the theater. Now keep in mind, I'm too young to understand what the fuck's going on. I'm just a little kid, and as far as I knew, my mother trusted this Dunham family, and I trusted my mother. So I didn't want to think of these people as bad people, and I had no understanding or concept of crime. I was too damn young at the time to understand what the hell's going on. And they were taking full advantage of the fact that I was too young to understand what the hell's going on. And they were setting me and my mother up. After they fucking framed a neighbor that lived a block away as a fucking pedophile, they were taking their time and systematically setting me and my mother up. And they were taking advantage of the fact that I'm too damn young to understand what the hell's going on. Well, I can describe in detail the movies Darlene Dunham took me to. I can describe practically in what order she was taking me to see these movies.